The first time I ever felt truly seen by my sister was when she couldn't even look me in the eye. Her voice, soft and unfamiliar, trembled against the hospital room walls like a secret she was scared to tell. She didn't ask me to come. She asked everyone else first. The boyfriend she had planned a Napa trip with the week before. Gone. Her closest friend from college who lived only 20 minutes away. 2 apologies and a voicemail left unread. The coworker she once bought overpriced lattes for during late meetings. All busy. I was the last number in her call log. The backup. The default. The burden. When I arrived, she looked surprised. Pale, weak, hunched beneath the stiff white sheets, Madison barely resembled the sister I'd known. The one with impeccable posture and designer coats. Her hair was matted. Her lips were cracked. Her eyes, once so sharp and judgmental, looked soft now. Afraid. Small. I had packed light. I wasn't sure what I was walking into. Just a few clothes, some toiletries, and a dog-eared copy of Little Women I'd been reading again, like I always did when life got heavy. She didn't say much that day. Neither did I. The silence between us wasn't angry, just heavy, full of things we never said, things I never dared to feel out loud. Growing up, Madison had always been the one who glowed. You know that kind of person. The one teachers adore, strangers admire, the one who walks into a room and makes everyone else feel like background noise. That was her, my big sister, my parents' pride and joy. And I was the other one, the one who needed patience, the one who couldn't handle fire drills or fast food restaurants, or the buzzing, relentless pressure of the world. It wasn't that I wasn't trying. I tried so hard, harder than she ever knew. But no matter how hard I pushed, I was always chasing her shadow. And eventually I stopped running. I built a small life. Quiet routines. Gentle friendships. My job at the library was calm. Predictable. I liked the smell of old books. The way the afternoon light hit the carpet in the reading corner. I liked being invisible. At least there, no one expected me to be someone I wasn't. Madison used to visit twice a year. Thanksgiving and Christmas. She never stayed long. She came in expensive coats and expensive shoes, always with some new success story or exotic trip to share. Her smile was polished, her compliments laced with subtle digs. "You seem happy," she'd say, like it was something to be surprised about. "It's good you found something that works for you. Like my life was a consolation prize. And when our parents died in that awful summer car crash 3 years ago, the last thread holding us together snapped." She came in, crisp black dress, dry eyes, and immediately took control. She made all the funeral decisions, handled the lawyers, sold the house. She moved the inheritance into a trust, said it was best this way. I was too stunned to argue. She gave me a monthly deposit and a cool kiss on the cheek, like she was doing me a favor. And then she left. I didn't expect to hear from her again. Not really. Maybe the occasional birthday text, a polite Happy New Year. But then came the accident. A stretch of black ice on a remote road outside Reno. Her car rolled twice. The first surgery saved her life. The second stabilized her spine. The third tried to give her back movement she'd never regain. I wasn't supposed to be the one she leaned on, but everyone else had scattered like dandelion seeds. So there I was, standing in her hospital room, holding a paper cup of lukewarm coffee, and watching my sister, the same one who once told me I'd never make it on my own, struggle to lift a spoon to her mouth. And yet, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt hollow. When they discharged her, no one else came. No balloons, no flowers, just me. I drove her home. I wheeled her into that cold, pristine condo she once told me was too modern for someone like you. And I stayed. I wish I could say she welcomed me with open arms, that she said thank you. But she didn't. She was embarrassed, angry at the world, at her body, at me maybe for being the witness to it all. She flinched when I had to help her undress. She avoided eye contact when I helped clean her after she soiled herself for the first time, She cried at night, silent sobs muffled into the pillow, and I just sat there, rubbing her back, pretending not to hear. Weeks passed like that. A silent dance of caregiving, of resentment, of grief. Then one night she whispered it. "I used to think you were weak." Her voice cracked. "But you're stronger than anyone I know." I didn't know what to say. The words were nice, but they weren't enough. They didn't erase years of being treated like a weight she had to carry, like an anchor she couldn't wait to cut loose. I told myself I was doing this because it was the right thing, because she was family, because no one else would. But in truth, part of me wanted to hear those words, not just once, but every day. I wanted to be seen. Finally. What I didn't know yet was that the accident had broken more than just her spine. It had shattered the foundation she'd built her life on, her career, her status, her independence. And in that rubble, there were things waiting to be uncovered, secrets I never expected, truths I wasn't ready for, and one, in particular, that would make me question everything I thought I knew about my sister, and about myself. In the beginning, caring for Madison felt like being caught in a quiet kind of war. One where the enemy wasn't her, not really, but the air between us, stiff with unspoken things, swollen with years of imbalance and unacknowledged pain. I rose each day before she did, made her tea just how she used to like it. A splash of almond milk, no sugar. I crushed her morning meds into applesauce. I learned how to lift her from bed to wheelchair without hurting her, or myself. I did everything because no one else would. But I also did it because, in some strange way, it gave me purpose. It wasn't like the library. It wasn't quiet or safe. It was messy and unpredictable and raw. Some days, she couldn't stop crying. Other days, she said nothing at all. She never asked how I was doing. Not really. Not at first. But she began to soften around the edges. First in the way she stopped flinching when I bathed her, then in the way she began to notice small things, like how I always hummed the same tune when folding laundry, or how I talked to her plants when I watered them, as if they were little pets. One morning, after I helped her onto the couch, she looked at me and said, "I never realized how strong your hands were." It was such a small thing, barely a sentence, but I carried it with me the rest of the day like a secret treasure. I hadn't even realized how much I needed someone to see that in me. Strength. Not pity, not patience, but strength. Still, there were moments that made me want to walk away. Like when she snapped at me for forgetting to plug in her phone, or when she scoffed at the clothes I picked out for her. "You always choose things that look dull," she muttered once. I swallowed the sting and said nothing. But that night, I cried in the guest bedroom, biting down on the blanket to stay quiet. I kept thinking, why am I doing this? Why am I giving everything to someone who never gave me much of anything? Then, 2 months into her recovery, something changed. I was organizing her mail. Piles of unopened letters, bills, insurance forms, when I found a red envelope. Thicker than the others. Unmarked. I thought maybe it was a card. Maybe someone from her past reaching out. But when I brought it over and placed it beside her, she looked at it like it had bitten her. She said nothing, just stared at it for a full minute before asking me to throw it away. I didn't. Later that night, when she had fallen asleep in the recliner, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. Faded and curled at the edges. It showed a much younger Madison, probably college-aged, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. Her arm was around his waist, her head resting on his shoulder. They looked happy, in love. There was also a letter, handwritten in shaky cursive. "Madison, I'm sorry I left without a word. I should have stayed, should have tried harder. I never forgot you. You were the only person who ever really saw me, even when I didn't deserve it. If you ever want to talk, I'll be at the old cabin through winter. You know where. There was no name, no address. Just that cryptic message." I put everything back into the envelope and tucked it into the drawer by her bedside. I didn't ask. Not yet. But it unsettled me. Because Madison had never spoken of anyone from her past with affection. And this letter, it felt like a wound she had buried long ago. A week later, the letter was gone. I don't know if she noticed I'd read it. She didn't mention it, but something in her changed after that. She grew quieter, more reflective. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at nothing for long stretches, her hands trembling slightly, as if holding a memory too tightly. One afternoon, as I massaged her legs to help with circulation, she finally asked me something real. "Do you ever feel like your whole life was written by someone else?" I wasn't sure what she meant. I said maybe, that sometimes it felt like I was following a script I never auditioned for. She smiled weakly. I used to think I had everything figured out. Every step, every promotion, every goal. But it was all built on control, on being seen a certain way. I didn't realize how much of it wasn't really mine. I wanted to tell her I understood, that I too had spent years trying to be something for other people, but the words got stuck. That night, while folding her laundry, I found a second envelope hidden under her sweaters, this one addressed to our parents, but never sent. Inside were 2 pages of anger and regret. Words like resentment, disappointment, and forgiveness, repeated over and over, tangled in scribbled-out sentences and tear stains. She had written it after their funeral, and never mailed it. And for the first time, I realized Madison wasn't just broken by the accident. She had been breaking for a long time, only now it showed. I thought we had reached an understanding, that we were healing, that maybe in some strange way, this tragedy had brought us closer. But I was wrong, because soon I'd find out what she had really done after our parents died. And once I knew, nothing, not the accident, not her newfound vulnerability, not even my empathy, would be enough to hold back the anger that would rise inside me like wildfire. I found the documents by accident. Isn't that how it always happens? One minute you're reaching into a drawer for a roll of tape, and the next, your entire reality starts unraveling in your hands like a loose thread. It was a manila folder, thin but dense with importance, stuffed behind a stack of old magazines in Madison's home office. I wasn't snooping, not intentionally at least. But once I saw the label on the tab, a cold curiosity grabbed hold of me. Estate adjustments, 2021. The year our parents died, my heart started pounding in that slow, suffocating way it does when your instincts are already screaming, "You don't want to know. Put it back. Walk away." But I couldn't. I opened it. At first it was just numbers. Account transfers, legal notations, trust allocations. I skimmed quickly, my brain struggling to keep pace. But the longer I read, the clearer the picture became. Our parents hadn't just left everything to be managed by Madison. Like she'd claimed, they had included me in the will, equally. 50-50. Every asset, every account, every property. But that's not what happened. Because Madison had contested the will, quietly, discreetly, through legal loopholes and quiet settlements. She'd shifted everything into a private trust in her name, placing me on a care stipend under the guise of ensuring my well-being. The way she phrased it made me feel sick. Monthly support for my brother, due to his limited capacity to manage high-stress financial responsibilities. Limited capacity. She made me sound like a child, like someone unfit to decide what to do with their own life, let alone an inheritance. All those years I thought she was giving me something out of generosity, out of guilt, maybe. But she was just tossing scraps from a table I was legally entitled to sit at. I sat there for a long time, the folder still open, my hands trembling. My breath felt shallow, my chest hollowed out by something deeper than betrayal. This wasn't about money. Not really. It was about control. It always had been. Even after our parents died, even after the accident that broke her body, she still needed to be above me. Needed to be the capable one, the strong one, the one who decided what I did, what I had, what I was worth. That night, I couldn't look at her. I brought her dinner, checked her pain meds, adjusted her blanket, all while avoiding eye contact. She noticed. Of course she did. but she didn't ask why. Maybe she thought she could feel it, the shift in the air, the cold wall I was starting to build back up. I barely slept. I kept thinking about all the things I didn't do with my life, because I thought I couldn't afford to. The programs I didn't apply for, the therapy I didn't pursue, the solo apartment I never rented. I kept seeing all those small, quiet sacrifices I made to stay safe, within the boundaries of the life Madison had built for me. And now I knew that life was a lie, a leash disguised as charity. The next morning, as I was changing her bandages, she tried to joke about something she'd seen on TV, a cooking show, I think, but I couldn't play along. I was too tired, too full of something bitter and sharp. I told her I needed some air and walked out. I didn't come back until after dark. When I returned, she was still in her chair facing the window. She didn't turn when I entered, just said quietly, "You found it, didn't you?" I didn't answer. "I always meant to tell you," she added. I didn't think you'd understand why I did it." That made me laugh. Not the funny kind. The hollow kind that feels like it's scraping something out of your ribs. "You didn't think I'd understand being robbed." She winced, but didn't argue. And that almost made it worse. "I thought you'd waste it," she whispered after a moment. "Or someone would take advantage of you. I thought I was protecting you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Protecting me? From what? A life of independence. From dignity. But even in that moment I saw it. Not guilt, not remorse. Just fear. That same old fear Madison had always carried. Of losing control. Of losing her status. Of not being the person in the room with the final say. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to ask how many lies she thought she could stack before the whole tower collapsed. But I didn't. I just stood there, letting the silence chew through the room, until finally she looked up at me with those tired, hollow eyes and said, "If I could undo it now, I don't even know if I would." That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not out of rage, out of clarity. She hadn't changed. Not really. The injury had slowed her down, made her dependent, but it hadn't shifted the wiring inside her. She still believed I was beneath her, that she was the caretaker, the decision-maker, the one with the right to decide who deserved what. But now, I had the upper hand. I was the one she needed, and I had choices to make. I could walk out. I could report the trust manipulation. I could take legal action, drag her name through court, and reclaim what was mine. Or I could stay, pretend everything was fine, and wait. Because sometimes revenge doesn't come in fire and fury. Sometimes it comes in silence. Slow, patient, and devastating. And I was done being the burden. After that night, everything changed between us. Outwardly, nothing looked different. I still helped her into her chair every morning, still portioned out her pills into those little labeled containers, still massaged the stiffness out of her legs and back when she asked. I smiled when I needed to. I nodded in the right places. I even laughed at her stories sometimes. The ones about med school, about old friends, about who she was before the accident. But internally, a quiet switch had flipped. I wasn't the same person she'd manipulated all those years. I wasn't the quiet, soft-spoken brother she'd controlled with passive-aggressive comments and fake concern. I was watching now, taking mental notes, counting the ways her life still depended on me. And for the first time I started to enjoy her discomfort, not in a loud, vengeful way. No, in a colder, more calculated one. She never apologized, not really. That line, "If I could undo it now, I don't even know if I would." It echoed in my head every night. I'd lie awake on the pull-out couch in her spare room, staring at the ceiling, remembering all the times I'd stayed behind while she flew forward, how she spoke about me like I was some fragile artifact to be protected. She hadn't protected me. She'd imprisoned me in the image of weakness she needed me to be, and now that image was cracking. She started asking more questions, as if trying to reach out across the chasm she'd dug herself. She asked about my life back home, the people at the library, the little walking route I used to take every Sunday. The books I liked to reread when things got too loud. At first, I answered her with short phrases, careful and measured. But over time, I let more slip through. I watched her face shift with each small revelation. Maybe she thought these little exchanges were healing us. Maybe she thought this was redemption. But I wasn't healing. I was studying, learning what she feared, learning what she regretted. I began to manipulate the temperature in the house just slightly, warmer than she liked during the day, colder at night. Just enough to unsettle her. I moved her things, not a lot, just enough to make her wonder if she was forgetting something. I delayed her appointments once or twice, telling her the driver was late when I'd actually rescheduled it. Nothing that would harm her. Nothing that would hurt her recovery. Just enough to remind her what it felt like to be dependent on someone else's mercy. The same way I had been for years. She began to fray at the edges. I could see it. The forced smiles. The moments she looked like she wanted to say something but didn't. Once she called my name in the middle of the night. Softly, almost afraid. And when I came in, she looked up at me with a kind of raw desperation in her eyes. "Do you ever resent me?" she asked, voice barely audible. I didn't answer. I just adjusted her blanket and turned off the light. The next morning she was quieter than usual. She avoided eye contact, didn't touch the breakfast I'd made. I waited. Said nothing. I wanted her to feel it, that slow unraveling of certainty. I wanted her to question every kindness I offered, to wonder if it came from obligation or strategy. And somewhere along the way, I realized something that surprised me. I didn't hate her, not in the way I thought I would. What I felt was more complex than that. A kind of mournful satisfaction, a quiet reclaiming of space I didn't even realize I'd abandoned. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to her. I was choosing who I wanted to be step by step. Still, the ledger sat hidden beneath my mattress, wrapped in an old towel inside a plastic bag. I looked at it every few days, reminding myself it was real, that everything she did, every justification she made, had been documented in black and white. That trust fund she'd stolen, that independence she'd denied me. I could take it all back with one phone call to a lawyer. But I wasn't ready yet. She started talking more about the future, about therapy, about maybe learning to drive again someday, with the right modifications, about working from home in a consulting role. She was rebuilding herself, piece by piece. You don't. And she wanted me to be part of it. I let her believe I might be. I told her I was proud of her progress, that I'd always believed she'd bounce back. She cried when I said that. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, and she reached for my hand like she used to do as kids, when thunderstorms scared her and she'd sneak into my room and pretend I was the brave one. I let her hold it. I even gave her a small squeeze. But inside I was miles away. Because what she didn't know was that I'd already made that phone call, weeks ago. And soon, everything she thought she'd secured would start to fall apart. I wasn't just coming for the money. I was coming for the truth. For the version of me she refused to see. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the burden. I felt like the reckoning. The first letter came in mid-May, folded neatly in a white envelope with an embossed return address from the law firm I'd retained back in Oregon. I placed it on the kitchen counter where she could see it, then went about my day like nothing had changed. She didn't ask about it right away, but I caught her glancing at it a few times, eyes narrowing slightly each time she wheeled past. I could almost hear her thoughts racing. Why was it addressed to her? Why a law firm? What did it mean? When she finally opened it, I was in the laundry room folding her sweaters. She didn't say a word, just held the paper in her lap, staring at the printed words as if they were written in another language. I heard the soft, papery sound of her hands shaking. She didn't look at me for hours after that. That letter was only a warning, a simple notification that a legal audit of our parents' estate had been initiated, and that her role as trustee would be reviewed. No accusations, no demands. Just enough to rattle the foundation she'd built her life on. For a while, she tried to pretend it didn't matter. She even smiled at me during dinner, thanked me for the lasagna I'd made like everything was normal. But I saw the fear sitting behind her eyes. That same fear I'd carried for years. That everything could be taken away in a moment. That someone you thought you controlled could stand up one day and turn the whole game upside down. A week later, a second envelope arrived. This one was thicker, heavier. Inside were photocopies of financial statements, highlighting the transfer of funds from our parents' joint accounts into a trust with only one beneficiary, her. The language was factual, clinical, but to me it read like poetry. Each number, each signature, was a brick in the wall of her deception. She knew I hadn't forgotten, that I wasn't the quiet, docile sibling anymore. That night she asked me to sit with her on the balcony, a rare request. The sky was soft with the blush of sunset, the kind of light that made everything feel suspended in time. She stared out over the city, breathing slowly, like the air hurt her ribs. "I thought I was doing what was best," she said finally. "When I moved the assets, I didn't want you to get hurt. I didn't trust you to manage things." I didn't speak. I wanted her to keep talking. She shifted in her chair, uncomfortable. "You've always needed help, and I thought if I gave you just enough, you'd be okay. I didn't want you to make mistakes with what they left us." "You mean what they left us?" I corrected gently. "Both of us." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did." Silence stretched between us, heavy and unresolved. I let it settle like dust in the air. "I'm scared," she whispered eventually. "Not just about the money, about everything, about being like this forever." I looked at her then, really looked at her. She was thinner now, her once glowing skin paler, the confident posture of her past replaced with something smaller, more fragile. This wasn't the golden sister anymore. This was someone else. Someone broken in ways that went far deeper than her bones. And despite everything, a part of me still cared. Not because she deserved it, but because I knew what it was to live in the shadow of fear. I didn't say anything else that night, just wheeled her inside, helped her into bed, and turned off the light. But the next morning she got another letter. This one was from the court. A formal notice of a pending motion to freeze the trust until an investigation could be completed. I watched her read it at the table, her hands trembling so violently she had to set the paper down. She didn't look at me, didn't need to. She knew this was my doing, and maybe, deep down, she understood why. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She just folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and asked me to bring her a glass of water. That small act of composure almost shook me more than a meltdown would have. But the thing about composure is, it's often a mask. And I was about to learn that Madison still had a few of her own tricks left, because 3 days later, when I returned home from picking up her prescription, I found a stranger sitting in the living room, a man in a tailored suit. He stood when I entered, introduced himself as Madison's new attorney. And just like that, the game changed again. She wasn't just going to let me take the pieces off the board. She was putting her own back in play. He had the kind of voice that sounded like it had been trained in courtrooms and boardrooms, steady, clipped, confident. The moment he said the word attorney, a ripple of something cold and familiar passed through me. Madison didn't say much. She was parked next to him in her wheelchair, hands folded neatly in her lap, like some kind of dignitary at a press conference. She wasn't smiling, not exactly. But there was something in her face I hadn't seen in months. Control. I kept my face blank, even as the weight of the moment settled in. This was her move, her way of saying, "You don't own this story." The lawyer explained, politely, almost too politely, that Madison was requesting a formal review of her financial management as trustee, and that she was open to cooperation, but would be protecting her interests accordingly. He handed me a folder with a counter-motion drafted inside, claiming that the trust was designed with practical provisions in light of familial health challenges. a subtle way of saying he wasn't fit to manage his share. I nodded as I listened, took the folder, said thank you, and I think that threw them both off. How calm I was. But inside, I was burning. When he left, she followed me into the kitchen. I could feel her watching me as I opened the fridge and pulled out a bottle of water, taking a slow sip to steady myself. She finally spoke. I didn't want it to get ugly. I turned to her. You brought in a lawyer, Madison, because I knew what you were doing. Her voice was quiet, measured. You think I don't see it? The mail, the schedule changes, the silence. You're punishing me and you're acting like it's justice. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. And you think hiring some suit to rewrite history is any better? No, she said. I think it's survival. There it was, the real her, not the broken woman who cried in the night, or the apologetic sister on the balcony. This was the strategist, the one who spent years building a life out of careful calculations. She was back. But this time, so was I. The days that followed felt like a stalemate. We moved around each other like ghosts, polite but hollow. I still helped her with the basics, her meds, her meals, the physical therapy. But everything was clinical now, procedural. No more long talks on the balcony. No more quiet moments of shared history. Whatever fragile thread we'd started to rebuild had snapped under the weight of truth. I spoke with my attorney every evening. We built our case carefully, not with vengeance, but precision. Every transfer she made after our parents' death, every email, every note. She may have been the executor, but she had violated her fiduciary's duties. My attorney believed we had more than enough to press criminal charges if it came to that. But I wasn't sure that was what I wanted anymore. This wasn't about punishment. This was about power. And slowly, silently, I realized I had more of it than she ever imagined. One night, maybe 2 weeks after her lawyer's visit, I heard her crying in the bathroom again. But this time it was different. There was no restraint. No quiet whimpers, just deep, wrenching sobs that echoed off the tile like thunder. I stood in the hallway, frozen. Something in me wanted to go to her, to put a hand on her shoulder and tell her it was going to be okay, but something else held me back. The years of quiet dismissal, the childhood spent feeling like a background character in my own life. I turned and went back to my room. The next morning, there was a note at the kitchen table. Her handwriting, neat but shaky, on a torn piece of legal pad paper. I don't know who I am anymore, but I don't want to fight you. Not really. I'll talk to your lawyer. I don't want to lose my brother too. I stared at it for a long time. The part of me that had waited my entire life to hear her admit that. To hear her drop the act. Should have felt victorious. But all I felt was empty. Because in her mind, she was still the one choosing to offer peace. Even after everything, she still saw herself as the one reaching down to lift me up. That's when I made the decision. I wasn't going to destroy her. But I wasn't going to save her either. I was going to make her live with it. The discomfort, the loss of control, the slow decay of the perfect life she built on top of everyone else's sacrifices. And just when she thought things were settling, I would give her one final, carefully delivered truth, the one thing she never wanted to believe, that she had never, not once, been the stronger one. The months that followed my decision were filled with calculated moves. The attorney I hired wasn't just a shield. He was a weapon. And with every letter, every document, I carved a path toward exposing Madison for what she truly was. Her once calm demeanor started to crack. The sleek, polished facade she wore began to fade as whispers of the investigation spread. People who had once admired her, her friends, her colleagues, began to distance themselves, realizing they'd been supporting a lie all along. But she didn't know it yet. She thought she could ride this out, manipulate it as she had everything else in her life. The day of the final hearing arrived. The courtroom was cold and sterile, filled with the hum of hushed conversations and the rustle of papers. I was there, not as the broken, weak sibling, but as the one who had been wronged. who had been forced into silence for far too long. My lawyer was by my side, prepared with irrefutable evidence. Financial statements, testimony from experts, and the damning documents that laid bare the full extent of Madison's betrayal. When Madison walked in, the room fell silent. She was still the woman who had always been better, faster, smarter. But today the cracks in her armor were too wide to ignore. She had an attorney at her side, but even he seemed unsure. He could argue the technicalities, the letters, the clauses, but there was no argument against the truth. Her greed, her manipulation, her complete disregard for anyone but herself. As the judge read the verdict, my heart pounded in my chest. The truth, my truth, was being heard, and I wasn't the only one who would hear it. Madison had no control anymore. She couldn't twist the narrative. She couldn't charm her way out of this one. The gavel fell. Madison's trust was revoked. She was to pay restitution, and the estate would be redistributed fairly between us. All of her actions were deemed fraudulent. As the court clerk called for a recess, I watched as Madison's face drained of color, her proud posture slumping for the first time. She looked around the room, at the people who had once looked up to her, admired her, trusted her, and realized they were all watching her unravel. She'd lost it all, her reputation, her power, and her control over me. It was over. The fight, the waiting, the months of tension. They all culminated in that moment. Madison had spent years being the person who stood on top of everyone else, convinced that she was untouchable, superior. She had believed she was above the law, above family, above consequences. But in the end, it was her own arrogance that destroyed her. She'd underestimated me. She thought I was the quiet, slow sibling who couldn't handle the world. But that's what she'd always missed, the depth of my resilience. The truth was, I'd been watching her, learning her every move, waiting for the right moment to strike back. And when I did, I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to expose her publicly. The law did that for me. I watched her sit there speechless as the verdict was read. She didn't even try to argue, to make excuses. She couldn't. She had already played every card she had, and they were all marked. Her life as she knew it was over. Her career was ruined. No one trusted her anymore, and her so-called friends, the people who had once cheered her on, began to distance themselves. The corporate job, the respect, the influence, all of it disappeared in the blink of an eye. I didn't feel a rush of satisfaction. There was no victory dance. There was just the quiet, hollow echo of a life that had been destroyed. Not just hers, but also mine. Because the truth was, even in winning, I had lost something too. I had lost the family I thought I would have, the connection I had once hoped that would exist between us. I walked out of the courtroom with my lawyer, feeling the weight of the last few months begin to lift. But as I stepped into the sunlight, I didn't feel lighter. I felt numb. Maybe I had gotten justice, but at what cost? The years of resentment, the years of bitterness. Were they worth it? The world outside the courtroom didn't stop. People went on with their lives, their work, their routines. But everything for me had changed. I wasn't the person I had been before the trial. I wasn't just the quiet sibling anymore. I wasn't the one who had to stay in the background and accept whatever scraps were thrown my way. I had stood up for myself. I had made my mark. I returned to Oregon. The town that had always felt like a cage now felt more like home. I settled back into my old life, but this time, I wasn't the same person. The anger had faded, but the lessons remained. Madison, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. The trust was gone, her reputation was shattered, and her friends and colleagues turned their backs on her. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Her boyfriend, the one who had left her before the accident, never came back, and slowly she began to disappear from the life she had once built. The last time I saw her was months later, at a family gathering. She had lost weight, her eyes were hollow, and her once pristine appearance was now disheveled. She barely looked like the woman who had once held so much power. But as we locked eyes, I saw something new in her, a deep, raw understanding that the world had shifted. She wasn't the golden child anymore. She was just another person, struggling to survive. I had no desire to reconcile. The past had been left behind, buried in the courtroom, in the cold files and financial documents. But Madison, still holding on to whatever piece of pride she had left, approached me as I was leaving the house. She stood in the doorway, her voice shaky but defiant. "You don't have to do this, you know. We could fix this," she said. I looked at her. This person who had made my life miserable for years. This person who had torn our family apart for her own gain. "You could have tried fixing this years ago," I replied, voice cold and steady. "But you never did. You never even saw me." Her lips trembled, but she didn't say anything else. She just stood there, watching as I walked away, her world falling apart with each step I took. And as I left her behind, I couldn't help but feel one last, sharp pang of relief. Because in the end, I wasn't just the person who had been wronged. I was the one who had survived. I had become something she could never understand. Stronger, smarter, and unbreakable. And as I walked into the next chapter of my life, I knew that for once I had won, and I didn't need anything from her to prove it.